The quiet town of Brookhaven lay shrouded in the soft glow of a winter evening, the streets dusted with snow that seemed to slow the world to a peaceful halt. Inside the Red Rail Diner, the hum of conversation was a familiar comfort for its regulars. But tonight the air was thick with tension. Malcolm Green, a tall man whose weathered face told stories of battles fought far beyond the fields of Brookhaven, stepped into the diner. His military jacket, though frayed at the edges, still held an undeniable dignity. He moved with the calm confidence of a man who had seen it all. But the discomfort of being an outsider was clear in his cautious steps. His entrance caught the attention of every patron in the room. Eyes lingered, not with the warmth of recognition, but with judgment and suspicion. Before we continue, we'd really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us get closer to 1,000 subscribers. It means the world to us. Thank you so much. At the counter, two officers, Turner and Calloway, exchanged glances. They had seen men like Malcolm before, veterans who had fallen through the cracks of society. They weren't interested in his service or his sacrifices. To them, Malcolm was just another vagrant to look down upon. Another one of those heroes begging for a handout. Officer Calloway muttered loud enough for those nearby to hear, his words dripping with disdain. Turner chuckled, adding, "Better watch your wallet, Samantha. These guys don't know when to stop begging." The waitress, Samantha Jacobs, had seen it all in her 2 years working at the diner. But something about Malcolm's eyes, steady and unflinching, made her pause. Without a second thought, she quietly stepped to the back and made a call, one that would change everything. In that simple moment, the course of Malcolm's life, and the lives of those around him, was set into motion. The wind whipped through Brookhaven, biting at anyone brave enough to face the chill. But Malcolm Green walked steadily through the streets, unhurried and resolute. The snow, which blanketed the town in a soft, almost serene silence, barely seemed to touch him. His worn military jacket, the edges frayed from years of service, hung loosely on his broad shoulders. A faded U.S. flag patch sewn onto the sleeve served as a quiet testament to his past, a past most people had forgotten. Despite the cold and the creeping shadows of the empty streets, Malcolm moved with a calm, practiced confidence. His boots, cracked and worn from years of service and hardship, made no sound on the snow-covered pavement. He had seen far worse conditions than this, the harsh heat of the desert, the sounds of battle echoing in his ears. Here, in the quiet of Brookhaven, it was almost peaceful. But even in this stillness, Malcolm's mind remained sharp, his training never far from the surface. He scanned his surroundings with precision, assessing the quiet houses, the distant glow of streetlights, and the empty alleyways. Every step he took was calculated, every move deliberate. His military training had taught him to always be alert, to always be aware of his surroundings. It was a habit he had formed over years of service, one that kept him alive when the world around him seemed determined to push him aside. As he walked toward the diner, his eyes briefly flicked to the building's neon sign, the warmth from inside almost calling to him. A meal. A place to sit and breathe for a moment. Little did he know, that moment would lead to far more than just a warm meal. The bell above the door jingled softly as Malcolm stepped into the Red Rail Diner, the warmth of the room a sharp contrast to the biting cold outside. The familiar sense of coffee and sizzling food filled the air, a brief respite from the harshness of the streets. Malcolm paused for a moment, letting his eyes adjust to the dim light, before making his way to an empty stool at the counter. The atmosphere shifted the moment he entered. Conversations faltered, and eyes turned his way, some curious, others filled with disdain. A young mother instinctively pulled her child closer, and an elderly man quickly slipped his wallet into his coat pocket, his gaze lingering warily on Malcolm. It was the kind of reception Malcolm had grown accustomed to, the unspoken judgment of a world that had forgotten him. Officers Turner and Calloway, sitting in a booth near the back, exchanged knowing looks before their voices broke the uneasy silence. "Well, look at that," Officer Calloway sneered, loud enough for Malcolm to hear. "Another hero who thinks he's entitled to something." Turner snickered, his voice dripping with mockery. "Better keep an eye on the silverware, Samantha," he said, casting a glance toward the waitress. "Wouldn't want him to pocket anything." The cruel comment stung, but Malcolm didn't flinch. He'd endured worse in the desert, and he could endure this too. His focus remained steady, his posture unwavering as he placed his order. Samantha Jacobs, standing at the counter, felt the weight of the tension in the room. She'd seen her fair share of difficult situations, but this felt different. She approached Malcolm with a soft smile, offering him a menu, but his calm demeanor and steady gaze made her hesitate. He wasn't like the others. His presence, though humble, carried the weight of someone who had lived through things the rest of them couldn't imagine. "Coffee, please," Malcolm said, his deep voice calm yet polite. "And whatever the special is." Samantha nodded, a quiet empathy in her eyes. She turned to prepare his meal, the harsh words of the officers hanging in the air behind her. Despite the tension, Samantha knew one thing: Malcolm deserved better than the treatment he was getting, and she wasn't about to add to the cruelty. The hum of the diner seemed to fade as the atmosphere thickened with hostility. Officer Calloway's smirk widened, and his partner, Officer Turner, joined in with a low chuckle. Malcolm sat motionless, his hands wrapped around his cup of coffee, his gaze fixed ahead. He wasn't surprised by their comments. It was nothing new, but that didn't make it right. "Better keep that attitude in check, old man," Calloway said, his voice rising slightly. "This isn't your usual street corner where you can beg for scraps." Malcolm didn't react. He simply lifted his coffee to his lips, his eyes never leaving the counter. He had learned long ago that some battles weren't worth fighting unless they were, and this one he knew was about to escalate. Samantha, standing behind the counter, felt the heat rising in the room. She had heard the cruelty in their voices, but this time something was different. There was a hint of danger in the air, something unspoken that sent a ripple of unease through her. She moved quietly, trying to avoid further attention, but the officers' voices grew louder, drawing the eyes of everyone in the diner. "I think it's time for you to go, Vet," Turner sneered, his voice sharp. "We don't take kindly to troublemakers around here." Samantha's hand trembled slightly as she set a plate of food in front of Malcolm. She couldn't just stand by and let them bully him. She had seen enough in her years of waiting tables, but she had never witnessed anything like this, never seen anyone so calm in the face of such blatant disrespect. "Officers, please," she said, her voice soft but firm. "He hasn't done anything wrong. He's just eating his meal." Calloway's eyes narrowed, and he pushed his chair back with a loud scrape. "Stay out of this, Samantha," he growled, "unless you want to be next." Malcolm's eyes met Samantha's face for a moment, his expression calm yet resolute. He could feel the tension in the air, the hostility growing. He wasn't afraid. He had faced much worse than this. But he could see the fear in Samantha's eyes, and he knew he couldn't let it go any further. "I've paid for my meal," Malcolm said, his voice low but steady. "I have a right to eat in peace." But it was too late. The officers were already on their feet, their postures threatening. Turner moved first, stepping toward Malcolm with a hand on his holster. "Leave now, or we'll make you," Turner said coldly. Malcolm stood slowly, his hands raised in calm surrender. He didn't want trouble, but he wasn't going to let them push him around either. He turned his gaze toward Samantha, offering a silent apology. The moment was slipping from his grasp, and he could feel the weight of it. The officers moved in, and Samantha's heart raced as she stepped forward, trying to protect Malcolm. But the situation had already escalated beyond words. She could see where this was heading, and all she could do was watch as Malcolm remained unfazed by their aggression. Malcolm didn't resist, but the defiance in his posture was clear. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. As the officers closed in on him, Malcolm's calm demeanor never wavered. His hands remained at his sides, fingers brushing the edge of the counter, his posture straight as he faced Turner and Calloway. The air was thick with tension, the sounds of the diner fading into the background as if the world itself had slowed to watch this confrontation unfold. Malcolm didn't move, didn't flinch, and for a brief moment, it seemed as though time had stopped altogether. The officer's presence was imposing, their anger palpable. But Malcolm stood there, a quiet force of dignity in the face of their brutality. "You're making a mistake," Malcolm said, his voice steady, cutting through the charged silence. Officer Turner sneered, stepping closer. "We don't make mistakes," he replied, his hand still resting on his holster. Malcolm's gaze flicked briefly to Samantha, who stood frozen behind the counter, her face pale with fear. The scene was spiraling out of control. This wasn't just about a meal anymore. This wasn't just about a homeless man being humiliated by two officers with a badge and a gun. The cold edge of reality sank in, and Malcolm knew the situation could go much further than either he or Samantha could handle alone. As the officers prepared to remove him from the diner by force, Malcolm made his decision. "If something happens to me," he said, his voice low but clear, making sure Samantha could hear, "call General Stone at the Pentagon. Tell him Malcolm Green is in trouble." Samantha blinked, her mind racing to catch up with the weight of his words. She had no idea who General Stone was, but the way Malcolm said it so calmly, so sure, made her realize this wasn't some idle threat. It was a lifeline. "General Stone," she repeated softly, the name lingering in the air like a forgotten prayer. I will. Malcolm's eyes softened just a fraction as he gave her a brief nod of reassurance. In that moment, it wasn't just the weight of his words, but the trust he placed in her that hung heavy between them. He had made his request, and she had agreed, though she wasn't sure how much it would matter. She didn't know what kind of man he was calling on, but something told her this was no ordinary phone number. With the officers closing in and Malcolm being forcibly pulled away, Samantha's hand slid into her apron pocket, her fingers brushing against the cool surface of her phone. She didn't know what the future held, but for Malcolm, for this moment, she was going to make that call. Samantha stood frozen as she watched Malcolm being dragged out of the diner, the officer's harsh grip never loosening. Her heart raced, her hands trembled, but the weight of Malcolm's words anchored her in place. As the door slammed shut behind him, the cold air seeping in with the officers, Samantha's mind snapped back to the reality of the moment. Her gaze fell to the ground where Malcolm's dog tags lay half buried in the snow, her breath caught in her throat. She knelt quickly, picking them up with trembling hands. The metal felt cold against her palm, but the weight of the responsibility they represented was heavier still. She looked at the engraved name, Green, Malcolm J. She didn't fully understand the depth of what she was about to do, but the look in Malcolm's eyes, the quiet dignity with which he had faced the officers, stirred something inside her. She couldn't just let it go. Samantha glanced at her phone, hesitation gnawing at her. Calling the Pentagon felt absurd, a decision that could cost her everything. The danger was real. But the moment she remembered the fear and the helplessness in Malcolm's voice, the decision became clear. With a deep breath, she unlocked her phone, found the number, and dialed General Stone's office. She could only hope that in reaching out, she wasn't making the biggest mistake of her life, but somehow, deep down, she knew she had to. The phone call Samantha made set off a chain of events that no one in Brookhaven could have predicted. General Stone's voice, calm yet commanding, filled the phone line as Samantha explained what had happened. "You did the right thing," he said, his tone unwavering. "I'll take it from here." Within hours, agents from the Department of Defense arrived in Brookhaven. Their presence was a quiet storm, a reminder that not all power rested with local authorities. Special Agent Green, a seasoned investigator, led the team, his expression as hard as the winter wind that swept through the town. He wasted no time pushing for Malcolm's immediate release and launching an internal investigation into the conduct of Officers Turner and Calloway. As the investigation deepened, the cracks in the Brookhaven Police Department's facade widened. What began as a routine inquiry soon revealed something far darker, a pattern of abuse targeting vulnerable citizens, particularly homeless veterans. The Shieldman network, an underground operation within the department, was starting to unravel. By the time Malcolm was freed, it was clear that this wasn't just an isolated incident. A much larger conspiracy was at play, one that stretched far beyond Brookhaven and into the very heart of the justice system. The fight for justice had only just begun. Monica Ford had built her career fighting for the oppressed, standing against the tide of injustice wherever it surfaced. But when she heard about Malcolm Green's case, something deep inside her shifted. This wasn't just another case of police misconduct, it was a systemic problem that needed to be exposed. Monica's sharp legal mind immediately began to piece together the clues. She dug into the records, reaching out to witnesses and collecting evidence that seemed to paint a far larger picture than she initially suspected. What she uncovered was shocking. A covert network operating within the Brookhaven Police Department, known as the Shieldmen. The network consisted of corrupt officers who targeted vulnerable individuals, specifically homeless veterans like Malcolm, under the guise of keeping the town safe. But the truth was much darker. These officers weren't just exercising power. They were exploiting their victims for financial gain. The Shieldman network, it seemed, was part of a much broader operation that extended beyond Brookhaven, with connections to the powerful defense contractor Falcon Corps. Falcon Corps had been funding these operations, providing financial incentives to officers for clearing out homeless encampments and gentrifying the areas they occupied. The more veterans and homeless individuals they pushed out, the more money they made. Monica's discovery was the key that would unravel the web of corruption, and she was determined to bring it all to light. Monica's investigation into the Shieldman network quickly gained momentum as the floodgates of truth began to open. Victims who had once been silenced by fear and intimidation found their voices, sharing their stories of harassment, brutality, and wrongful arrests. Each testimony painted a picture of a deeply corrupt system that had systematically targeted the most vulnerable members of society, homeless veterans like Malcolm. With this evidence in hand, Monica began building a legal case that would expose not just the officers involved, but the entire web of corruption that had allowed the Shieldman network to thrive. But the real turning point came when Samantha, who had been quietly supporting the cause, took matters into her own hands. Armed with the footage she had secretly recorded and the security footage from the diner, Samantha created a video that told Malcolm's story, one of dignity in the face of abuse, and of a system bent on destroying people who had already given so much. When the video went viral, it was as though the entire country was forced to confront the truth. It spread like wildfire, with millions of people watching, sharing, and demanding justice. The video sparked national conversations about police misconduct, veteran homelessness, and the abuse of power. But the powers that be weren't going to let this go down easily. Falcon Corps and the Brookhaven Police Department did everything in their power to suppress the growing scandal. They tried to intimidate witnesses, silence reporters, and discredit Samantha's video. But the momentum was unstoppable. As pressure mounted, the community rallied around Malcolm, Samantha, and Monica. They weren't just fighting for one man's freedom anymore, they were fighting for the dignity of every veteran and every person who had been victimized by a broken system. The Shieldman network, once hidden in the shadows, was being exposed for all to see. The battle was far from over, but the tide was turning. As the investigation into the Shieldman network intensified, the cracks in the system deepened, and all roads eventually led to Captain Greer. His role in orchestrating the corruption was undeniable, and his connections to Falcon Corps became the final piece of the puzzle. With Malcolm's testimony, Samantha's recordings, and the tireless work of Monica's legal team, the web of deceit and exploitation began to unravel, revealing a network far more extensive than anyone had imagined. But even as the evidence mounted, Captain Greer was nowhere to be found. His arrogance and sense of invincibility had led him to believe he could escape justice. He had used his position to manipulate, intimidate, and destroy lives for years, and now, with his empire of corruption crumbling, he was desperate. Malcolm, drawing on the training and courage he had once used on the battlefield, made the decision to bring this fight to an end. With the help of his former military team, including Q, Ghost, and Trace, he launched a daring operation to track Greer down and bring him to justice. Their plan was precise, using their military tactics to infiltrate the last place Captain Greer would think to hide, an abandoned airfield on the outskirts of Brookhaven. The final confrontation was intense. Malcolm faced Greer not with weapons but with the sheer strength of his resolve. "You thought you could erase us," Malcolm said calmly, his voice carrying the weight of everything he had endured. "But you're wrong. We're not invisible anymore." Greer, cornered and realizing his time had run out, attempted to make a final escape. But before he could flee, federal agents, led by Monica, swooped in, securing his arrest. The evidence was overwhelming, and Greer's secrets, along with the dark dealings of Falcon Corps, were now laid bare for the world to see. With Greer's capture, the Shieldman network began to collapse. Officers who had once been untouchable were now under investigation, and the police department in Brookhaven was being restructured from the ground up. The corrupt system that had long been allowed to thrive was being dismantled piece by piece. As the dust settled, Brookhaven began to heal. The community that had once turned a blind eye to injustice now stood united, working together to create a safer, more compassionate place for everyone. Malcolm's journey from a homeless veteran discarded by society to a man who helped expose one of the greatest injustices his town had ever known became a symbol of resistance, resilience, and the power of one person to ignite change. For Malcolm, the road ahead was uncertain. His struggles, though far from over, had sparked something larger than himself. His fight for justice had given him a new purpose, and with the support of Samantha, Monica, and his fellow veterans, he knew that the battle for dignity and equality was just beginning. And for the first time in years, Malcolm felt hope. For himself, for the community, and for the future. From this story, we learn that resilience and courage can change a system, no matter how corrupt and oppressive it is. The protagonist fought not only for themselves, but also for those whose rights were being violated. The message is clear: injustice will not last forever if we don't give up and are always ready to fight for justice. If I were the protagonist, I would keep fighting, not just for myself, but for those who are deprived of their rights. I wouldn't stop until the system is completely changed. By 2050, I hope racial discrimination will be a thing of the past, if we continue to stand up and fight, every day, every hour. But that can only happen if each individual takes action and works toward a fair society. Note, this story is entirely fictional and created for the purpose of raising awareness. It highlights issues of responsibility, justice, and the importance of treating everyone with respect and dignity. We firmly oppose violence, prejudice, and injustice in all forms. Viewer discretion is advised.